Hello, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining the session on human intelligence in leadership. What I really want to be talking about today is how we think about the human capabilities that we all have. We know that technology is making a big impact on all of our lives, so how do we make sure that we bring in those human intelligences, particularly for this session, into the realm of leadership? My name is Alex Pearson, and I studied actually Chinese language and literature at university and went to live in China in 1992, and where I then stayed for 25 years and set up a few different organizations, particularly in the areas of education, training, and also the arts. I moved back to the UK 5 years ago, and I'm now a lecturer and a course director at the University of Sussex in the business school there. And I convene a module on leadership and another module that's also about managing projects and technology. And I'm also the director of the Yurt Academy. So I spend quite a lot of time in both capacities, actually, both at the university and the business school, but also within the Yurt Academy, thinking about human intelligences. For 30 years, I've been training corporations, but also at university, on creative thinking. And now I've kind of expanded that to think more about other human intelligences that we'll explore today. So for the sake of today, there are going to be four main areas that we're going to cover very quickly. The first one is really to think about, the context of leadership in the change that's going on now. So what is the context of leadership, or what is the future of leadership in the context of the future of work? So that will be my kind of introduction. And then what I'd like to do is to see how we can use human intelligence in leadership to build, first of all, organizations that have a human-centered culture, so organizational culture. And then secondly, to use that human intelligence in leadership to think about how we can then also put this onto an individual level, so to be working with individuals, but also within teams, within organizations, to build organizational activists. So I'm kind of thinking of an organization as more of a movement rather than the traditional concept of an organization. So something that's very dynamic, something that is entirely led by its people and the potential of those people. So that's going to be the agenda for today. But to start with, let's go to the context and the future of work. Now, the future of work is, of course, an incredibly complex concept in itself, and there are many, many different elements to it. So I'm really going to be focusing on four areas of the future of work. The first one is the one that all of us are very aware of, perhaps now more than ever because it's been accelerated, and that is the technological revolution. Now, this revolution is great. Of course, it's being able to automate things that are actually quite mundane that we don't necessarily want to be doing. It means that we can streamline processes. We can do a huge amount of things that we couldn't do before through things like geospatial technology, but also, 3D printing. I was just actually last weekend talking to a friend of mine who works in burns and medicine, and how they're using technology to take real expertise from here in the UK over to post-conflict countries like Somaliland and Palestine, but also to other countries like Mongolia, where they've now got quite big issues with burns. And so the technological revolution is absolutely massive, and it has a big impact on leadership. So we're going to be thinking a little bit about that. Secondly, industry disruption. Again, very few of us can escape from the impacts of the industry disruption. But again, this is good things. This is allowing entrepreneurs, small businesses, large businesses, to really totally change how they run their business. The gig economy has changed everything. The outsourcing, we've got the cryptocurrency, all of these different massive disruptions are beginning to kind of put ideas in leadership that weren't there before. And it means that leadership now has a very, very different role to the one in the more kind of traditional organizational setting. A third area I'd like to touch on briefly is that of longevity. Now, there are two kind of main aspects to this. The first is the idea, I don't know if any of you have read Linda Grattan's book, The 100-Year Life. It's a very, very good book, very enlightening. But this is the idea that, the next generation down beneath me are expected in good circumstances to live very easily to the age of 100. So that has to change how we think about our career. We don't have that traditional 3-stage career where it's education and then it's career and then it's retirement. That's just no longer fit for purpose, because we cannot retire, most of us, either financially or in terms of the amount of time we've got left after retirement at the age of 65. So we need to be thinking about what are we going to do and how are we going to upskill so that we can continue to work for as long as possible. So again, this has quite a big impact on how leaders approach the training of their own people, but also their organizational strategy. The second aspect to longevity is the idea that organizations, for the first time ever, are now dealing with 5 generations at work at the same time. People from the age of 18 all the way up to the age of 80, all within an organization. So for leadership, how do leaders deal with this cross-generational collaboration, which of course can bring a huge amount of positive impact? And the last area is that of the Anthropocene era, the era where we're very focused on human beings. And this has been good, of course, but at the same time, we have to question whether we've pushed it a little bit too far. And now I don't think there's one business that cannot think of their role beyond just their business remit, their role within society, within the planetary system in which we exist. So again, I think that leadership has been pushed to think outside of just the business outputs, and to see how that organization fits within society as a whole. So they're quite big areas. So let's just very briefly touch on each 4 of them when we think about human intelligence in leadership. So the first one we talked about there, it was technological revolution. And from the point of view of leaders, I think it's really key now that leaders look at their human intelligence within their organization so that they can actually have some sort of a balance and create a collaborative workforce that's collaborating both between the humans and the machines. So we have to recognize what is useful to be done by artificial intelligence or robotics or automation or anything that is part of the technology realm, and then what is it that lives within the human realm. The human capabilities such as envisioning the future and hoping and desiring and all of that sort of stuff. So we need to create a workforce that is really collaborative between the human and the machine. And that, from the leadership perspective, means that we need to be developing many more of the human intelligences of things like agility, of creativity, of design thinking, and being really aware of how we can use the human intelligences to make sure that we've got, we're in the pole position to be taking our organizations forward using both our people and the technology that is available to us. In terms of the industry disruption, leaders have got a big challenge here too. There are many, many roles that exist now that will not exist from 5 years from now. Many job descriptions that will just become extinct. But the good news of that is that there'll be a huge amount of job roles that are actually going to come out that we don't even know. We can't imagine what they are yet, but they're going to be created. And they're going to be created along with the industry disruption, but also, of course, the technological revolution. So what does that mean for leadership? And what does that mean for human intelligence? Well, again, it's about change. So as a leader, we have to be preparing ourselves, but also the people who are working with us, the individuals and our teams, for that change. So we've got to have that resilience. We've got to know how to build resilience so that we can change every time there's a disruption. Creativity comes back into it because we've got to be able to think and problem solve from that very creative point of view. And we have to build those human intelligence skills, those skills that are absolutely transferable, so that we can today use them for this and next week use them for that. So the leadership role is working out, predicting what kind of change, and then working out what those skills are. We can be training up our individuals and teams within our organization so that we are ready for any industry disruption that comes our way, or we can even be the creator of that disruption, and we've got the people and we've got the people power to go with it. The third is longevity, as we talked about before. And so from a leadership point of view here, it's again trying to shake the status quo and trying to look at it and say, okay, how can we challenge that? And how can we, rather than talk about retention, how can we say, okay, we want to create people within our organization that are going to be bigger and better than our organization. We want to be fostering a sense of lifelong learning within every single individual in the organization. Now, if they become activists, as I talk about, rather than just employees, they're going to be so much more engaged and they're likely to stay. So the knock-on effect is you're going to have that retention, but you're not looking to create that retention. It's a different mindset. It's a different way of approaching it. So we need to, first of all, be thinking about how can we collaborate cross-generation? How can we tap into the expertise of the 60, 70, 80-year-olds and the energy and the new expertise of the people coming in the 20s and in their 30s who have totally different skill sets? How can we make sure that we've got a culture that has that collaboration between the generations? And then also we've got to be thinking, how are we developing people on the individual level, so that it's very much individualized, personal learning, but also that collaborative team learning, and then taking that up to the organizational level so that even our strategy is informed by human intelligence of all of the different generations within our teams. And the last bit here to think about in leadership terms is the context of the Anthropocene era. So now businesses are being forced, and this is a good thing, they're being forced to look beyond just profit. And this has been going on for a while now. But it's not about CSR. It's not about offsetting, what the organization is doing. It's about embedding. It's about embedding those purposeful tasks that the organization is doing so that the organization itself is really a purposeful and a meaningful member of society. So suddenly, purpose and values take on a different level. They're not just organizational values, they're organizational values that align within that more holistic vision of how and what organizations' roles are within the context of society. So for leadership, it's really taking the leader's vision outside of just the organizational context, but also saying, okay, how do we align that within the bigger picture? And again, this is a good thing. This is incredibly engaging. It's incredibly motivating. It means that the organization is shifting towards being a movement. And where you have that dynamics of a movement, then you're likely to have much greater engagement. And if you've got greater engagement, you've got greater freedom for all individuals to be bringing their own human intelligence into the organization and sharing it with the teams. Okay, so that's the kind of context, but it's also thinking about, what is the future of leadership? So the way I look at it from the point of view of human intelligence, there are pillars of human intelligence that helps me understand it. And from that, we can build capabilities, skills, behaviors, and attitudes that we can use as individuals, but we can also use as leaders and as teams, in order to help us prepare both for that organizational context, but also for the individual context. And the three that I have chosen to do a lot of research on over the last many, many years are those of curiosity, creativity, and connectedness. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, the curiosity is all about being alive to new ideas. It's turning on that curious disposition that asks the questions. It becomes habitual to be curious. It becomes habitual to challenge the status quo and say, well, wait a minute, why are we doing that? Is there another way of looking at this? So it's really beginning to change the way we look and the way we see. Now, curious is very related in a way to creativity, but creativity is new ways of looking, absolutely, and its foundation in a way is curiosity. But it's also new ways of thinking. So there are many different ways of thinking. And when we think about it that creatively, we divide out the different styles of thinking and we use different thinking skills appropriately at different times. And then it's new ways of being. So once this becomes habitual, then we have that way of actually changing our behavior within organizations and changing our behavior as leaders so that we are much more creative in our approach to all of the problems that come our way. And the third of the pillars here is connected. So this is the idea that we need to be connected to ourselves. We need to know who we are, but we need to be connected to others. And we need to be able to have and want to desire that collaboration between others. And then thirdly, we need to be connected in the world in which we exist. So again, as leadership, in leadership, if we can develop this curiosity, this creativity, and this connectedness, then we're in a really good position to be able to kind of unleash that human potential that we have within our teams and our organizations. So what's the link with this curious, creative, and connected of the human intelligence with, first of all, let's look at organization, or at the organizational level. And it's about using this human intelligence to build organizational culture. Because if we can do that, we can change that organization to be able to produce things that are going to be probably a lot more creative, bring a lot more value to the individual, to the team, to the organization, and to the society as a whole. So it's about using those human intelligences in 4 different areas that feed in to create a human-centered culture, an organizational culture that is absolutely human-centered. So those 4 areas, first one is process. So how can we be human-centered? How can we use human intelligence when we're thinking about our processes? A lot of our processes, we tend to get a little bit foggy because we really put the emphasis on technology at this point. But if you remember back to the technology bit that we talked about before, it's getting that balance and making sure there's collaboration of the human and the machine when we come to think about our processes. Beyond that, it's all about models, so it's models of thinking. It's models of understanding things. So it could be HR models, it could be learning models, it could be thinking models. And again, are we making sure that those models are being driven by human intelligence, not just algorithms? We can, of course, use the algorithms and we use data, it's incredibly useful, but are the models being driven by the human intelligences? The third one here is values. I'm sure many of you think about values often, particularly at that leadership level. So are our values also being driven by human intelligence, and are they human-centered? And beyond that, are they outside and aligned within the context of society and the organization that you're dealing with? Excuse me. And the last one here is strategy. So again, as a leader, looking at our strategy and making sure that it is being driven by our human intelligences. So I suppose my challenge to you is to perhaps go away and have a little bit of a think about this. Can you use those human intelligences of curious, being open to new ideas, of being creative, new ways of looking, thinking, and being connected to self, to others, and to the world in which you live, within those 4 areas that are going to create that human-centered organization? So can you be curious, creative, and connected when you're approaching your processes? Or can you even check your process to make sure that you have some curiosity, creativity, and connectedness in there? And then the same for the other 3 areas that are going to create that human-centered culture. So there's human intelligence, or at least an introduction to it on the organizational level, which I think is going to be very useful for those of you who are leaders of organizations of whatever size and in any industry. But how can we use this on an individual level? Well, when we go to really ignite potential, we have to be tapping into different elements of the individual. We have to, of course, be thinking about their skills, thinking about the behaviors, thinking about their potentials, but we also need to be thinking about their values. We need to make sure there's an alignment with the organizational values and the individual values to make sure that we have that engagement and that we can convert engagement into activism. If we can do that, we've got a much better opportunity of igniting that potential within our teams. We have to be thinking about the capabilities and then that long-term development, so the development of all the different generations, and that has to be individual. It has to be different for each one, because all of us are going to be at different stages in our own career development. But there are skills that are transferable, that are based on human intelligences, that can be used to help us do all of this, and it can help us at each stage in our career development. And some of the skills that I've highlighted, again, these come out of Curious, Creative and Connected, are things like agility. They're things like courage. How do you build courage, both as an individual and a team? Purpose. How can you get that alignment of individual and team and organizational purpose? How can you have a disposition that is curious and is constantly questioning? How do you build teams that are both collaborative, but they're absolutely based on trust? And this is even more complex when we're talking about virtual teams, which pretty much all organizations are now, be they global or just virtual because of the current situation. How do we build individuals and teams that are based on compassion and that use real empathy and actually desire to make a difference in somebody else's life? And how do we build teams that are resilient, individuals that are resilient, so that we can face any disruption, or we can create disruption? We can actually, again, be that activist that wants to create disruption that's going to bring a difference to our organization. So these are some of the skills that we can really begin to develop within our individuals. So really have individual learning paths so that we are building that disposition towards lifelong learning. But then within the teams, where the teams actually get the value of this, it's not just notices on the wall. They're realizing, okay, if we do this, I'm going to benefit. I'm going to benefit as an individual. I'm going to be able to really work within teams on a much, much more kind of efficient manner, because we're all engaged. We're based on trust. We are working towards win-win. These human intelligences are 100% transferable. So as things change, as the dynamic organizations shift and bend, then everyone within that organization is ready and prepared. So to recap on that, what we were talking about really is the context of change. So we've got the technological revolution, it's good, but it's bringing new challenges for leadership. We've got industry disruption, again, very new challenges for leadership. How do you prepare your people to shift into roles that we don't yet know what they are, they don't yet exist? Longevity, how do we deal with cross-generation? And how do we make sure that we're ready so that we're upskilling throughout our lives and not just that first bit of it? And how do we think of purpose as organizations being bigger than just the organizational purpose itself? How do we think about the processes and the methods and the values and the strategies with new eyes? How do we use curiosity and the human intelligence of creativity and connectedness to see if there's new ways of shifting the way that we look at how we run our organizations? And how can we use those human intelligences of courage, of purpose, of collaboration, empathy, trust, all of these different things, to absolutely build the skills and the attitudes and the behaviors that are needed for all of our individuals within our organizations? And therefore, it's going to ripple up, it's going to have an impact on the team, and then it's going to ripple up again, and it's going to have an impact on the organization as a whole. And then, of course, it's going to overflow into the society, and then that is going to bring even more value to our business and our organization, because we're having positive impact within our societies. And just to mention very briefly, my new book is coming out in September, which is absolutely on this subject. It's Curious, Creative, Connected, Engaging Human Intelligence in a Tech-Driven World. So please do visit my website or get in touch with me if you are interested in this whole idea. So thank you very much for joining. And I very much would like to have more of a dialogue with many of you. So please do come and join, bring your questions, bring your ideas, and I look forward to seeing you then.